Mob Entertainment just gave us the trailer for Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, and it looks peak. A great spotlight on the new antagonist, Yarnaby, a showcase of the new environment, and some lore hidden inside. But honestly, the trailer itself gave us the least amount of information we've gotten so far if you've been paying attention to the ARG. But with all the information we have, I think we have a pretty good idea on what Chapter 4 is going to be like and even the game after. So slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Now, since this channel primarily covers FNAF lore, there's a good chance that a good chunk of you don't really know what's going on in Poppy Playtime. So I should note what's happened so far in the story, at least during the game. The series starts when our player character receives a letter that there are still people trapped at the Playtime Co. factory. We go in and explore a bit and are eventually chased by Huggy Wuggy deeper into the facility, to which we find a glass case with a Poppy doll trapped inside. Once we let her out, she thanks us for doing so and tells us more about the factory we're inside of. But before she can give us answers on how to get out of the factory, she's kidnapped by Mommy Longlegs. Once we defeat her, Poppy helps us onto the train and then explains that we're too important and she can't let us leave yet, turning the tracks of the train and having us go deeper into the Playcare, which is the on-site orphanage for the factory. Yes, there is an on-site orphanage at a toy factory, although at this point it's just more toys, there's no kids here anymore. At the Playcare, we defeat Catnap to protect ourselves and Poppy explains what's actually going on. That there used to be kids here, but kids and adults were being turned into toys, and eventually all of the toy experiments rebelled, killing everyone in the factory, but they're still trapped inside. And that there's one toy, the prototype, who's keeping them here and killing some of the toys. Poppy begs for us to help her kill the prototype, and we agree to do so, going deeper still into the factory. And that's where Chapter 3 ends. There's a lot of deeper story that we didn't get into yet, but I want to put all that together once we go over what we've learned about Chapter 4 and all the new backstory that we've learned through the ARG. So what do we know about Chapter 4? Starting off with the trailer itself, it takes place immediately after the end of Chapter 3, in the same elevator in fact. We arrive at what appears to be a prison system, judging by these cells and the symbol on the outside of the facility. That symbol will be important later. There's also piles of dead critters everywhere, smiling critters and nightmare critters alike. And looking at all the piles of dead critters in these areas, I have a feeling there's a reason why there were so many of this toy. This was probably the go-to experiment for the Bigger Bodies initiative. The Bigger Bodies initiative was ran secretly by Playtime Co. in the 90s, trying to turn people into toys, like I mentioned. And I have a feeling the Critters toy line was specifically made for these experiments. Think about it. This seems like a really easy, repeatable toy to try to turn a child into. There's a bunch of different kinds, so you can match the toy to match the child's personality. They're human adjacent, right? They're bipedal, have 2 arms, have a head, and they're small, so if you mess up, it's easy to get rid of the evidence. I should be clear, I've mentioned twice that they were turning people into toys. The actual mechanism of these experiments is so far unclear. We know that the toys are biological. They are flesh and blood and have organs. The question is, are they literally taking a person and surgically turning them into a toy, or are they somehow moving the soul or consciousness into a biologically built toy? That we don't know, and frankly I think it's probably closer to the second explanation, judging how they made an entire human being, an adult person, into this small brontosaurus toy in one of the trailers. So like, obviously a whole man cannot fit inside this plushie, but maybe just some of his organs were we don't know the mechanics. Maybe that'll get explained later on in the game series, or maybe that'll be the like suspend your disbelief moment, right? Like we don't need to know how specifically they're turning people into toys, we just need to know that they can, right? By the end of the trailer, we meet Yarnaby, who looks really cute until it attacks us. And like I said, this is great, and there's a lot of information in this trailer, but if you've been paying attention to the Chapter 4 ARG, this trailer is the cherry on top. We knew a lot about this going into it. So what was the ARG for Chapter 4? I've mentioned this in the past, I am not a finder of clues. I'm really bad at looking and digging through games to find little clues hidden around the environment, and I'm also really bad at ARGs. I think the hardest ARG I was ever able to solve is Shipwreck 64, which is a really good ARG for beginners because it's mostly contained within the game and the links the game provides you, and even then I had to ask for help from the developer Squeaks de Corgay himself because I didn't understand 2 of the puzzles and it was my fault. So like, I'm not good at ARGs or finding clues like that. I'm much more suited to taking the clues other people have found and arranging them into finding a narrative, right? Like, oh, we got these 10 letters from the ARG. alright, my brain kicks into placing those letters together in a way that makes sense. So a massive shout out and credit to Sheep's Rampage and the entire Poppy Playtime community. Sheep's Rampage has a lot of really good videos detailing and chronicling the solving of this ARG. And the Poppy Playtime wiki also has a great page detailing everything about the ARG, how things were found, and what was found. And again, the community itself that worked tirelessly to crack these puzzles. Because honestly, it's a really impressively put together ARG, so shout out to Mob Entertainment as well. So to briefly go over how the ARG functioned and what we found out along the way, it all started with the 3 chapter recap videos that Mob Entertainment put out to get people up to speed for the release of Chapter 4 in January. It was basically a way to get new players to know what's going on, kind of like what I did at the beginning of this video. But at the end of each video, there was a different piece of a puzzle to solve, eventually spelling out this poem. On felted feet and with bated breath, sleep draws ever near. Over paths turning clear, but I am not afraid of death, for we have already met. This was an important poem because 4 hours after the last video was posted, a Playtime Code Discord account on the official Poppy Playtime Discord server posted these messages, eventually asking if this was a secure board and asking the people on the board to prove it, posting the first line of that poem. Once people filled in the rest of the poem, the Playtime Code Discord account acknowledged that this was a secure server, introduced themselves, posted this image of a cipher document and these instructions. More instructions to follow. They will be invisible to your eyes. When you receive them, we need you to run icepick.bat on c:/domain/network/globals.authenticator. And for a while, that was all we had. But throughout October, several content creators, myself included, received flyers from Mob Entertainment in the mail, basically anyone who was part of their partner program. All of them containing a flyer from Warren Bach Construction. This was the same company that Eddie M.N. Ritterman worked to create the secret lab that we hear about in Chapter 2. At first, I kind of thought it was just a funny bit telling us to get a job and a fun reference to the game, but it turns out that if you held a blacklight to the flyer, there were actually 3 different versions of it, with different letters being highlighted under a UV blacklight. Mine said domain, but there was another version that said central and another version that said access. Once this was made public, several people in the community found out that if you went to centraldomainaccess.net, you were met with this terminal. Going back to the Discord instructions we got, if you ran start, and you can still do this, the website is still live, it's really cool, start space icepick.bat, it would initialize, then ask for a specific target to scrape. If you then pasted the other instruction from the Discord message, it would scrape the target and bring up a new terminal, this one in like a 80s styled computer, and the terminal would open another command prompt. This command prompt is where most of the ARG answers are hidden. And before we move on, it's noteworthy that if you punch in the command date, it'll say the year 2002 matched with any month and day that it currently is. Okay, this is huge. Originally, this ad spot was going to say that this plushie was going to be around for 1 more day, but the kind folks over at Makeshift actually extended the campaign for 1 more week. So if you have not gotten a toast plushie yet, you have like 7 days or 8 days or something. I think it ends the 16th at 11 p.m. I'll try to do a big old stream at least the day before or something to try to get this little guy to 400. I really want to try to sell 400 of these guys. We're very close. We're almost there. If you have not gotten one yet, you have 1 more week to do it. It's got 2 sides. How can you not want one? You want one. Consume product. Okay, bye. There's also several other commands that you can use here, and this is, like I mentioned, where a lot of the nitty-gritty of the ARG and the codes that were found and the codes that were cracked are located. The community found a lot of really cool things in this terminal, one of them being this flyer for the Young Geniuses program. This is something we hadn't heard of before, but it seems like Elliot Ludwig was trying to test the intellect of children while he was alive. This is important because up until now, we knew that Elliot Ludwig was doing tests on rats, but we had no reason to assume he was actually testing and experimenting on children. He seemed to be mostly innocent, but the Young Geniuses program could be painting a different picture, because he's at least testing the intellect of children. We also know that Dr. Harley Sawyer was a part of this Young Geniuses program, which is important because he's one of the main heads behind the Bigger Bodies initiative. Deeper into the ARG, and after some real-life hidden documents, we get more information about Quinn Navidson, the child who was eventually turned into Yarnaby. Judging from the GameStation assessment forms, he was a completely normal child, but after being turned into Yarnaby, his intellect suffered, but physically he became much stronger, faster, and aggressive. We also learned that while being experimented on as Yarnaby, he exhibited traits that were similar to a cat or dog in the loyalty aspect, where he seemed to grow fond and loyal of those who took care of him. When Dr. Harley Sawyer noticed this, he used it against him. Essentially, he saw the loyalty that Yarnaby exhibited as a weakness, and pitted pitiful, and wrote in his conclusion of one of his studies, and I'm going to quote this directly because it's messed up, "I'm going to isolate it. It'll have contact with no one but me. Considering my importance to the project, it's doubly important that I'm properly protected at all times. And besides, I might get a good laugh or two at the pathetic little sounds it makes. By the time I'm done with it, I'll be its entire world. It'll know nothing else." And this is true. A third document that's stamped with the prison's logo notes that after Harley was gone, Yarnaby began to exhibit the grief that an animal might when their master is gone, waiting for it to return and not doing much else. This is really important to Chapter 4 because Yarnaby is the main antagonist, so we'll make sure to touch on this later. Finally, we received a few more documents that folks got from a tap code cipher on the CCTV footage that you can access through the terminal. Like I said, I'm bad at this kind of stuff, but that password allows you to download a zip file with these fragmented and scrambled documents. Sheep Rampage, along with several other fans, did piece together several documents from this mess though. One being an incident report from someone named Brendan, another one being about sandwiches and lunch orders, which is kind of funny, and another being probably the most important document we've gotten so far, and that being a letter from Leith Pierre reaching out to Dr. Harley Sawyer about an amazing opportunity in 1990. This is almost certainly the Bigger Bodies Initiative, and this is huge because up until now, Harley Sawyer seemed to be the main brain behind it, but it seems like Leith Pierre was the one who envisioned the Bigger Bodies Initiative and reached out to Dr. Harley Sawyer because of his work on the Young Geniuses program. So not only is this separating the Bigger Bodies Initiative from the Young Geniuses program, it's giving us a date for when the Bigger Bodies Initiative program started, it's telling us that Leith Pierre and Harley Sawyer were the ones behind it, and it's giving us more evidence that Elliot Ludwig seemed to not really know what was going on. Either he died before it got too big, died before it happened, or was kept in the dark. After all, if Elliot Ludwig was behind it, why wouldn't he be the one sending out the letter? All this information in mind, we get a much clearer picture of the true goings-on at Playtime Co. So I think what's best to do right now is go over the true story of the Playtime Co facility. And to be fair, I did this like 10 months or so ago when Chapter 3 came out and the analysis for that chapter, but we've gotten more information since then and some things have changed, and not everyone watched that video. So I think it's best to go over the full story again, but now adding more information and context that we've recently gotten. In 1930, Playtime Co was founded by Elliot Ludwig. Yes, the game pronounces it like the YouTuber, not the Koopa. Sometime in the 30s, he also got divorced, and in the 60s, there was a tragic death in the family. Nevertheless, Elliot continued to work at this toy thing, making the Poppy Playtime doll in 1950. During this, he was also conducting experiments on rats with poppy flower products like gas and gel to try and alter life and death, due to the historic symbolism around the flower. As far as we're aware, Elliot only tested it on rats and suggested that larger bodies would be more perceptive. At some point during this, he also creates the Playcare, an in-house, fully indoor orphanage. Later still, Elliot creates the Young Geniuses program with an unclear goal. It definitely seems like Elliot was inviting children to the factory and testing their cognition, but it doesn't seem like he was making them into toys just yet. The only experiment we have definitive record of Elliot Ludwig performing is on a rat. Way later, the company is falling on hard times, struggling to pay its workers, failing at their experiments, and failing to keep them a secret successfully. But in 1990, Leith Pierre reaches back out to Harley Sawyer, who assisted in some way with the Young Geniuses program, and the two of them create the BBI, or the Bigger Bodies Initiative, which would turn people into large toys to solve all of their problems. Free perpetual labor, experiments that would work, and if someone finds out, stick a toy on them or add them to the roster. It's also speculated that around this time, Elliot Ludwig dies. After all, he seems to genuinely care about the children, be an overall kind man, and to be fair, we know he died sometime in the 90s. During the early stages of these experiments, possibly the first Bigger Bodies experiment, the prototype was created. All we've seen of it is a skeletal robotic hand, but it's apparently incredibly smart and dangerous, being able to make a laser pointer out of an alarm clock to trip up cameras and trick guards to check on it. The Bigger Bodies Initiative then begins to use children of the Playcare as test subjects, creating the game station to track the vitals and skills of various orphans before testing. Some notable toys and their functions were Huggy Wuggy, who performed security for the factory, Mommy Longlegs, who guided children at the game station, Boxy Boo, who would silence employees who learned too much, and Catnap, who would use gas to keep the children of the Playcare asleep at night. We now know further down from the Playcare is a holding facility for the toys still being tested on, and that one of them, Yarnaby, was incredibly loyal to Harley Sawyer. Harley Sawyer is eventually removed from Yarnaby. It's unclear if he died or left the Bigger Bodies Initiative, but by that time, Harley was was Yarnaby's whole world, and he was still fiercely loyal to him. At some point in the 90s, the living toys rebelled against the factory workers to escape. They called this the Hour of Joy, but they're trapped in the process, and after a long enough time begin eating each other to survive. Sometime later, we receive a letter saying the employees are still there, just trapped, and Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 begins. And that's the story so far before the game starts, and we know what happens in the game. So knowing all of this, and the new information about Yarnaby, what can we expect to see in Chapter 4 and beyond? Chapter 4 definitively seems to be that we're exploring the prison the experiments were actively held in, judging by the matching insignia on the prison document and the outside of the facility, the barren cells, and like I mentioned, those piles of dead critters. I mean, the difference between the playcare and the prison is stark. The playcare had children, so it looked nice, whereas the prison holds experiments, so we don't need to afford them that luxury. Honestly, I think that the fact that this chapter is exploring where experiments were held gives us a possibility that we now know what each chapter is going to be until the end of the game, because this seems like a perfect inflection point. Think about it. Chapter 1 showed us where toys were made. Chapter 2 showed us where children were evaluated. Chapter 3 showed us where children were held. Chapter 4 is showing us where toys were held. If we follow the inflection between Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, we get a pattern, where Chapter 5 will show us where the toys were evaluated, and Chapter 6 will show us where the toy experiments were made, that being the final chapter of the game. A perfect inflection, right? I hope this graphic kind of explains what I'm trying to say. But more about Chapter 4 specifically. Yarnaby is noted several times to be fiercely loyal to Harley Sawyer. This is important for several reasons, because there's a good chance one of two things is true. The end of the last story so far video released by Mob Entertainment has the voice of Harley Sawyer saying, which brings us to now. We knew that the voice was narrating these videos, but that could have just been like a nice touch. But the fact that it ends, this brings us to now, seems to imply that we're going to meet this voice. So either Harley Sawyer is still alive conducting experiments at the basement of the Playtime Co. factory, or the prototype has fully adopted Harley Sawyer's voice. After all, we know from a tape from Chapter 3 that the prototype is able to copy people's voices. It even copies Harley Sawyer's voice in that tape. Now, I want to be clear before I go off on this tangent, it's so much more likely that the prototype is using Harley Sawyer's voice and using that to manipulate toys. But I have sort of this really out there theory that I've kind of really grown to like. The whole point of this game so far is that we need to go to the bowels of this factory to confront the prototype and destroy it. If that's true, why has the prototype been with us this whole time? Its hand shows up in Chapter 2 at the game station, and it shows up in Chapter 3 near the playcare. We don't have to go to the prototype has been coming to us this entire series. So what if it's possible that Poppy is wrong? The prototype isn't the one behind everything. The prototype is just off doing its own thing. What if Harley Sawyer is the one at the bottom of this factory, and the prototype is sneaking along and hitchhiking with us as we open each door down to it? Because so far, all the prototype has done to us is take away the bodies that we kill. We kill Mommy Longlegs, it takes its corpse. We nearly kill Catnap, it puts it out of its misery and takes its corpse. It hasn't attacked us once, and it should have if it wants to kill us by now. I still think the final part of this is that someone wants to turn a toy into a human, and they want that human to be us. That's why we keep going down deeper, and they're letting us come down deeper. But whether that's Harley Sawyer himself or the prototype who wants to be human again, that's up to interpretation. Like I said, I think it's still more likely that the prototype wants to become human, and that's why it's letting us get this deep into the facility, and why I think the game will end at the chambers where they turned people into toys. But I think it'd be really cool if this whole setup that we all see where this is going is actually a double-blind twist, where Harley Sawyer is still alive and the prototype is kind of trying to help us as an anti-hero. But again, it should be noted, regardless if it's actually Harley Sawyer or the prototype using Harley Sawyer's voice, we know that Yarnaby ain't that smart, so Yarnaby is still fiercely loyal to who it thinks is Harley Sawyer. Honestly, again, it makes more sense to be the prototype here, because if Harley Sawyer disappeared from Yarnaby and Yarnaby is sad and grieving, and then suddenly Harley Sawyer's voice reappears, Yarnaby would be not only ecstatic, but fiercely loyal once again. So if we want to make it further into this factory, we'll have to defeat him. There's one more thing, but it might be a leak. I'm not sure. I think it's part of the ARG, but someone mentioned that it might be a leak, so I'm not going to say it. I just know that I know about another creature with some piano keys, we'll say. It'll probably be one of the side antagonists like Miss Delight was. At least those are my thoughts on Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, the story so far, and what the game is shaping up to be. And honestly, I'm really excited for it. I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts in the comments. I know some people were not super fond of the Nightmare Critters, but I think it makes sense lore-wise, and I like their designs. But I'd love to hear what y'all think. And I have great news, because if you haven't noticed, the kind people over at Makeship actually extended the plushie for one more week. The plushie was supposed to not be available starting tomorrow on the 8th, but they actually give us one more week, so that final date of this plushie is now November 16th at I think 11 p.m. I could be wrong. I will be streaming the last day of this plushie. I want to get it over 400 real bad. I'm gonna do my best to try and drive that up, but we're close. In the meantime, if you want to know my thoughts on the future of gaming in general, on the second channel recently I made a video on if the Switch 2 will dominate the console wars, which are unfortunately back, and you can see that right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers. Until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.